I'm very lucky to have you guys here today. I just wanted to say thank you so much for joining. A lot of you know that we've been just looking at the beginning of the Sandra Birchmore case, and today we have two really hardworking, really amazing activists from the Sandra Birchmore Facebook group who've been speaking out in Sandra's name, trying to bring awareness for quite a while now. So thank you so much. Thank you so much for joining me today. Today we have Mizzy and Suzanne.
Thank you, Rosie.
Thank you for having us.
Something that you said last time, Suzanne, which I found really interesting, was when I was comparing, I was saying, you know, how this is, a lot of people compare this case to the Karen Reed case. And in a way, it seems like, you know, both of these women were framed, whether it's one who was framed with killing herself or one who was framed with killing somebody else. And what you said was, you know, it's different to be framed and shamed in a sense when you're not actually there to speak for yourself and to actually try and repair some of the damage that's been done. So that really was what got me thinking about this phenomena of these questionable suicides, but like particularly like what's being said about these women. And yeah,
that's a really big issue. And Rosie, you put it very you put it very diplomatically when you say questionable, you know, suicides, because as we're finding with Sandra's case, it may not be a suicide at all. But I still would revert back to the thought that had it been, there would still be a litany of failures and miscommunications and departure from doing anything meaningful to help this young woman. So if it were true that the finding states that she died by suicide, then the events leading up to and the dialogues sort of in her stead, even when she was alive, did nothing to help her from the years of grooming and exploitation and abuse that she endured. There are absolutely other living victims that have been blamed and shamed, and even we know this now. A former, you know, I would say victim of Robert Devine's was framed as well. So there's just so, and I know you're familiar, Rosie, with Devine's, you know, former whatever you want to call it, controversy. So given that you know, it was public for a bit, but then was kind of squashed, and then this poor other woman sort of faded into obscurity. But there were also other threads in that case of being crazy, of being suicidal, of you know, both Devine and Farwell making claims that they had to see these women or else they were going to succumb to their suicidal tendencies. That's the reason for them showing up and abusing and exploiting and defying orders repeatedly, because they were in their minds, or whatever kind of delusion that they have, they were rescuing them with their exploitation, their repeated abuse. It just doesn't make any sense. There's so many layers to it. It's disturbing. And you know, we don't have the luxury of a living survivor talking about it right now, which wouldn't that be such a boon to have access to somebody who has come out the other side and is actually living a quality life, but still wants to do something to put a dent in this clearly repeated and systemic abuse. That it's all done. A lot of it is done under the guise of, well, this woman is unwell. This person's crazy. They're unstable. They're not taking their medication.
Yeah.
right. And that relates to something that you said last time we spoke as well, Mizzy, when you said that a lot of what they were using, or what people would be using to disparage Sandra, and I'm sure people in similar cases, were the actual symptoms of grooming itself.
Yeah, definitely. You know, grooming does, you know, we have never denied that Sandra did have mental issues. And even if some of those issues were before she was abused, the abuse compounded it. So it made whatever was wrong worse. You know, you can have depression, anxiety, suicidal tendencies, drug use, become an alcoholic. you know, there's so much more. Hypersexual, you know, those are symptoms of people who are groomed. And, you know, people to say, well, you know, she was an adult when she died. Yes, but she was programmed from 13 to 23, and the abuse never stopped. So she was never out of their clutches. She was always being abused for the 10 years she was abused. And like I said, what they did, if you take somebody who may have some mental issues and you start exploiting them, it makes it worse. And you're not helping her. You're hurting her more. And if you know, in history, women have been known for hysteria. They, you know, we used to get put into mental institutions for hysteria, for where it was just our periods, you know, things like that. You know, to abuse a young woman who was very vulnerable made things worse. And instead of abusing her, she was turning to them. Her mother put her in this program because she thought it was an amazing program for her child to be around people that she respected and wanted to be. And instead of helping her, instead of being a mentor, they destroyed her life. So I personally believe that she was murdered. But if she wasn't murdered, they're the reason why she is dead now. Their hands have blood on it. They abused this young woman to do whatever happened that night, whether it be fighting with Matthew Farwell and telling him, I'm not getting rid of my child. This is my baby. And if you don't want to be part of this baby's life, then we're done. Or her taking her own life. I personally, like I said, I personally believe she was murdered. But even if she did it to herself, it was because of these men. They drove her to it, especially Matthew Farwell.
Yeah, and what you said there was very interesting about people making that claim that she was an adult when this happened. But everything that you've just said shows that she was robbed of a childhood, so she couldn't like naturally progress into being a stable adult. That was never actually something that was offered or afforded to her. But saying you never denied that she had mental issues prior. I mean, what do you regard as the risk factors for being groomed? Because oftentimes I would imagine that they're looking to exploit something that's troubling these young girls in their life to begin with, and that is a pattern that we see, and that's something that in a sense they would be targeting. So I mean, it's almost like regardless of whether she had issues beforehand, it would still be something that they would be trying to seek out these troubles, would they not, to make it easy?
I'm so sorry to interrupt, Rosie. Mizzy, do you mind if I take this one? Because I read up on it.
I can piggyback on it.
I read up a lot on it before coming on. And I wanted to jump right in, Rosie, because the risk factors were sort of laid out very early on. Not only by, you know, Sandra and her mother sort of looking outwardly for help and support as they were, you know, sort of going through some of the normal, you know, growing pains that a single parent and a young girl would go through. The issue, sort of the origin story of how Sandra came to be known by these law enforcement officers and school officials, is because she and her mother were in an active program designed for, you know, not necessarily for single parent households, but for parents and children to strengthen their bond and to work through, you know, maybe some psychological and emotional and behavioral issues. And that started when Sandra was 9. Now, that program that they went through at the age of 9 until I believe it was 12, that they were very actively in the cooperative program, that was all recorded. And that was all under the care and control of the Stoughton school system. And by the way, those records were also accessible to Robert Devine when he was establishing the Explorer program. So not only did he have accessibility to the inner workings of Sandra's mind as she was going through vulnerabilities of losses she had experienced as a child, of you know, not having an active father in her life, of having a mother who was going through a terminal illness and, you know, and struggling to balance parenthood and working and being, you know, a single parent with an illness. He had access to that, and he also had access to the troublesome records of the development of Matthew and William Farwell. who are well known to have had, you know, issues as they were growing up, and as it was pointed out amongst one of your colleagues, when they were teens and they were acting out, Robert Devine acted on their behalf to stop them from any type of criminal charges. But the reality is that those two were up to no good, and that they were acting out in ways that we don't fully know, and they were buried by their mentor, Robert Devine. And just as they were getting out into the world to start their careers as law enforcement and also as military men, he was going into a next level of power. The role of deputy chief was basically created for Robert Devine and handed to him by Chief Paul Shastani. And when I was trying to link it together with the Youth Explorer program earlier, I came up with a document that was linked to it, where Shastani signed an agreement to hand over the Explorer program to Robert Devine, and that was the last issuance was 2012. He handed the program over. It's a certificate. It's on file with the town of Stoughton, handing over the civilian youth programs to Robert Devine, and then never looking back. There was never any checks and balances. As you probably know, Rosie, from researching the Explorers program, there are certain, you know, credentials and safety protocol that they have to follow if they want to maintain their certification. So, for example, not being one-on-one alone with a person under 18, and in this case, in the context of police, they were only allowed to be in a squad car with a parent's permission, and weren't supposed to be one-on-one. Without a doubt, Sandra probably had sign-offs for that because, you know, her mother thought she was in good care. But she's just one example. Robert Devine ran that program with complete and total impunity, with no checks and balances, because as the Marshall Project points out, who broke the stories about these programs, he never checked in or recertified from 2012 on. So the things, you know, the certificates and agreements that you're supposed to go through, safety protocol, he didn't follow them, and he maintained private records on these children in his own locked office without anybody else having access to them. So in Sandra's case, we know that she had a record of recording psychological and emotional and treatment issues. With William and Matthew Farwell, that they also had files through, you know, the Stoughton school systems that would be indicative of emotional, maybe behavioral issues. I'm kind of curious as to why Devine, you know, sort of chose them to be proteges. He was their hero, keeping them from, you know, getting into further trouble, and molding and shaping them into being promising young, you know, law enforcement workers. Those stories have since been scrubbed, redacted, buried, almost taking away from the heroism of Devine, you know, turning them into the fine officers that they allegedly were. And as far as the whole, the connection with women and the blaming, shaming, and framing, which is, I'm just going to have to go ahead and keep using that phraseology, is that that's very easy to do if you can pin them as being unstable, as being crazy, even if you appear to apprehend one because of the fact that they're having a meltdown, so to speak. You can just throw them into, you know, a section and be done with it, and then maybe, possibly, I mean, we're not there when it happens, but incur some type of intimidation on the flip side and say, you know, next time you act out like this, we'll just put you in jail. You won't even get help. And now everybody knows that you're crazy, so you won't be able to get away with anything moving forward. So don't think about complaining. Don't think about reporting, because no one's going to believe you.
Right, and therein lies that cycle, right? I mean, firstly, I mean, that kind of just demonstrates how scary it is when that amount of power is in the hands of someone with just not the right intention. But I mean, in terms of that attitude towards women and depicting them as crazy, and then coming across as this savior figure and authoritative
Yeah,
that's how you say, figure, and then, you know, trying to remedy that with what's actually abuse, which is causing more of the same signs and symptoms that they're just going to point to as crazy. It's almost like these poor women don't stand a chance, because it's just like spiraling. The more they try and get out of it, the more they're abused in response to symptoms of being abused, right? There's just no way out.
Well, that's the cycle of gaslighting.
She was a young child who wanted attention. She just wanted to belong, you know, and she thought the Explorers was a place for her to belong. And these men gave her the attention that she craved. So it became this big cycle. They were feeding her attention, like Suzanne said, gaslighting her. And it just became this like Ferris wheel of like continuous motion. I would like to kind of piggyback on what was said earlier. I've interviewed a few people who knew the Farwell brothers when they were younger, in their teenage years when they started the Explorers. I know a witness who was in the Explorers with them. She was groomed by Robert Devine. It's in the police reports. She is a witness to how things were in the program and how much they were favored, how much Devine took those boys under his wings, how much they were put above everyone else. They were vulnerable too. You know, they with their peers, their classmates, their age, they were outcasts. I had two people who graduated with them or went to school with them, I should say. And I'm going to try to say it delicately or nicely. They thought they were punks. They were rude, obnoxious, especially William. Matthew was more quiet, but nobody really liked them. So with their peers, they appeared to be outcasts. So they would hang out at the junior high school because at that time, Robert Devine was an SRO officer. And did I say that wrong?
SRO, yeah.
Sorry. And he basically let them hang out there at the after school program he ran, which is another weird thing is like he did the after school open gym program. He did the Explorers program, and he also was an SRO officer. So he was constantly around children. And these children looked up to him. The young woman that was groomed, she had the biggest crush on him, and she said she wasn't the only one. And, you know, she told me specifically that those boys were groomed also, but also to be predators, not to be victims. And when she told me that, it just like sent chills down my spine. It's something that I had thought possibly went on, but she was a witness to this. So they weren't hanging out with their peers. They were hanging out with junior high school kids. And in the junior high school kids didn't know them. So they thought they were like the cool older boys. So they were looked up to. So it would make sense that Devine would take them under his wing and he would show them how to be like him.
Well, not only that, Mizzy, as I was going through the transition period earlier when Chastain was, you know, shouting from the rooftops how amazing they were for catching Devine and giving him a lot of power and control. He sought after deficits in the youth groups or resources, and like a destroyed, rundown playground. Sought after deficits in town funding to get grants in order to develop this Explorers program into bigger and better and make it into a makeshift police academy and turn it into a paramilitary, fitness program too. So he basically created like a full-blown, press tour media blitz of how he was going to mold and shape the youth of Stoughton, and brought boatloads of money into doing so. And then once that money was there, nobody looked back. Nobody really looked back and said, okay, is there any reason why we should be, looking at the numbers climbing, or the locked files, or the massive amounts of activity and all these different people and moving pieces? They gave him carte blanche to do it for years. And the funding is a big part of it. There's a couple of articles on that I'd be glad to send over, because you can see the manifest of taking a program such as Explorers or such as Boy Scouts of America that was under fire, and saying, well, no, we're not going to do that. We're going to make it different. We're going to make it better. And we're going to put all these, bells and whistles and turn it into a makeshift police academy. And he polled all of the children in that in that space where there were no real good programs at the time to see if they'd be interested. And they were, oh my God, pick me. They were, and I don't know if he polled all of them or if he specifically polled the ones that were in the troubled files. I think it was probably everybody, but he still had the ability to pick and choose. And I would argue, I know that early on when Sandra was trying to get into the program, she wasn't allowed in right away.
Really?
A bell went off in my head, because you would think that she was a shoo-in. She was already, in these programs, with her family, cheering her on to develop their, parent-child relations, and was heavily involved in these after-school programs. You would think that she would have been a sure thing, right? Well, instead, Divine screened her and sort of called and said no initially, and it reminded me of when Mizzy was bringing up the other young woman who was groomed by Divine and had a crush on him and had a blowout with him. There was this moment where he turned on her, scolded her, and gave her silent treatment. That is a very, very textbook gaslighting, abusive, predatorial tactic, is to take somebody who's, oh my God, I just want you to love me. I just want you to know that I'm good. I want you to see me as a helper. I want you to see me as positive, and to take that moment and say, no, you know what? No, you're not good enough for this. And sort of put them on ice so that they're hurt and feel scolded and feel less than or not enough. So that then a few months later, when they try again, oh my God, guess what? You're in now. By then, there's already that intermittent, pattern of, psychological conditioning. You failed me before. You're not going to fail me now, right?
Right. So it's like a push and pull as well. I mean, and you're starting off with this premise that you're not good enough to be here, so that when you're accepted, you can't even see what's wrong because you're so grateful that you're accepted, right? I mean,
well, imagine you're this wide-eyed young woman who idolizes these guys, and Divine's there, like pulling out, the file from the school system, going, no, does one of those, no, come back to me in a few months, kid. How enthusiastic and how much harder is that young woman going to strive for his affirmation at that point? And I mean, this is, since you were making that connection between other systems and Micah Miller and the church, I mean, these are psychological tropes. These are common threads that the power of them is so profound that a lot of people can't see it, because because they function in darkness. They function in, back offices and in basement, janitor rooms, in places where people don't hear the dialogue, or they don't witness the toll that it's taking on the person who's just looking to be cared for and looking to be protected. And in order to build that trust of being a protector, part of the game is to knock them down a little bit first, and I think that people like individuals like Matthew and William Farwell were handpicked to continue that process. It was no mistake. There was no, they look good on paper because they're military heroes. That was one part of it, but it was probably the mental and emotional deficits, or the holes in their psyche, that made them made them choices of Robert Divine's, because that's somebody that you can just make your own, puppet in continuing whatever kind of scam he had going on. I mean, it's still, he's not even done yet. The level of indignance and failure to accept any responsibility on the part of Robert Divine, I don't even want to call him Esquire now, because I don't even think he's an active lawyer at this point. But the level of indignance and the way he was facing off with investigators saying, yeah, good luck, you won't find anything. No, I didn't do any of that. No, I don't have anything on my devices, because he was so confident that his technological skills weren't going to fail him. And that's something that is going to have to be explored a lot more heavily, because if someone like him could do the misdeeds that he did over the span of, I'm going to say, probably 15 or 16 years that we know of, based on his ability to, to delete and scrub and hide and destroy. And we still found out about his involvement with Sandra.
Yeah.
And we still know about his former, victim, Tiffany. I'm going to call her a victim. Doesn't matter if she was an adult, and what the outcome of that was. She was a victim of being framed also. And so that pattern is not a one-shot deal. It's not a two-shot deal. It's not possible that there's only these two women that have, or the third, the third would-be victim that Mizzy refers to. I wouldn't even say she's a would-be victim. She's just one that didn't get fully actualized in terms of the level of exploitation. But if you were in that at all mentally, you're still a victim, as far as I'm concerned. But there's not really much. They already vetted her and ruled her out as being a victim on paper, because she was looked into by the state police and considered, like, kind of not to be dismissive, but great story, but there's nothing there. That's kind of how they landed on her. There was no misdeed done. And to me, a misdeed would be simply having a young woman alone in your office, and any level of impropriety, because they probably, not one of them should have ever been alone in an office with a young woman for an extended period of time, because that's just not how that's supposed to work, period. But the fact that there was that, and the fact that there were online communications that were maybe nipped in the bud by nosy parents and maybe school officials saying, I think, Mizzy, you've referred to this before, that she had gone into to talk to him, and someone told her to pull up her shirt or fix her appearance. So
she went to visit him at this police station, and she had a low-cut shirt on, and one of the other officers that knew her kicked her out, say, you need to get out of here, because she was like flirting with him, because she was 12, 13, and she had the biggest crush on him. She said,
imagine that. I mean, that goes to the core of shaming, of victim shaming, is to tell. And I hear this even now today, as people pointing at adolescent girls and saying, it's that outfit, or it's that shirt, or it's those shorts. No, it's the predatorial men on the other side that's the problem. It's not the child who's dressing a certain kind of way. And the fact that she was even scolded for sauntering in dressed like a rebellious, young lady, is, there should have been a sit down at that point. There should have been somebody pulling her aside and being like, hey, or Divine, and saying something.
Divine.
Yeah, I mean, maybe talk to her to say, is there anything that we need to know, but without scaring her. But nobody even raised an eyebrow to say, like, hey man, why do you have this girl bebopping in here dressed like she's going on a date? That's a
child. She was not the only child this was happening to. He was driving around with young girls in his patrol car and his personal car. And one girl came up to him and told her, stay away from Robert, because he's mine. So this wasn't just her. This was other children that the grooming was going on with. I do want to touch on something, because there was a mother of two students who did go through the program, and she knew Sandra, and she would sometimes give her rides places. When her mom was sick in the hospital, she gave her a ride, and she knows that what went on, but it's hard for her to feel, because her children were treated so differently. And I wonder if that's partly because, she was able to be there. There were two of them, brother and sister, in the program at the same time, so it was a situation where they didn't have the opportunity to groom these two children. And actually, she said Robert was really good to her. Divine was really good to her children. Especially her son, because her son didn't want to, do the running and all the paramilitary type deal stuff. And she said he quit, and Divine kept pushing him to come back, and he didn't want to come back. So it was hard for her to see both sides of it, because she said he was good to my children, but for him to go and do this to other children is so disgusting. And
well, that speaks to the contrast of the heroic and the good deeds. Because that's the public facing, that's forward facing. That's those are the ones that get you in the newspaper for, the pizza party at Town Spa, where all the kids are celebrating. The Town Spa is a local, sort of joint, if you will, where they would celebrate the achievements of the kids. So Robert Devine would be sort of the mayor of all of these, celebrations with the youth of Stoughton, propelling into the next, the next generation of kick-ass law enforcement agents. I wonder how many have stories about their success in moving forward and doing good in the law enforcement field. I'm curious to know about that. I'm not saying that there aren't, there would have to be.
Well, I spoke to a mother whose son went through the program, and he left after 2 weeks because of the abuse that the boys were getting. They were very hard on the boys and not as hard on the girls, and he couldn't take it. So he left, and he is in law enforcement. So
Really?
there are people who went into the program who really wanted to go into it because they wanted a future in law enforcement. But because of the way they acted in there, they didn't feel like they could continue with the program. So
Right. And that kind of makes me think about the young lady you mentioned earlier who wasn't ruled a victim even though she was involved in the program. It kind of makes me think that just being exposed to that program, just being in that environment and seeing the abuse of your peers is abuse enough. I mean,
yeah,
that is traumatizing on its own, even if you're not being targeted directly.
yeah,
Right.
she I do keep in contact with her. And when we spoke about what had happened to her, she was very, like, the way I felt like she was describing it was, her stomach dropped when she heard about Sandra. Like, it was devastating to her because she thought to herself, that could have been me. She was vulnerable. Her parents were getting divorced. Her house wasn't a good place at that time, not like abuse or anything, but just, fighting and what was going on in her family. So she was able to be picked to be groomed. She was a perfect person to groom because she had two parents that were, it wasn't, the focus wasn't on her, it was the fighting. And she felt like, she went into this program because she was in the after school program. She had a crush on Divine. She went into this program to have guidance and to learn stuff. And this man is taking her into, an office and telling her she's gorgeous, puts her up on the desk and starts touching her hair and tells her, because she was upset that he was getting married. And he was like, oh, don't worry about it. When you turn 18, I'll take you out on a date. You're a knockout. And he didn't like.
When you turn 18, I mean, I guess he probably didn't think about at that time that the age of consent is 16. Because that's been a point of contention. I mean, I know I'm being a little bit flippant about it, but that's been a point of contention, that these men keep stressing the fact that they didn't have anything physical going on with Sandra until after she was 16, because that's the age of consent.
Yeah.
Now, the age of consent is not the same as the responsibilities of, say, a youth leader that is in charge of children until they age out and become 18. But what I wanted to know, since Rosie, you were talking about the tie-in with the Explorer program, do either of you mind if I read a little excerpt into Robert Devine's launch of his publicity campaign about the Explorers? Because it's really, it's a quick read, and I pulled it out earlier, as long as my print is okay. So this was the launch of it. So this was 2011. There's a lot going on in 2011. 2011, by the way, was a year that was it William Farwell that was passed over that year?
I believe that.
No,
it was later. I think it was later. I don't know. I'll have to look.
No. There's something significant in 2011, but I also think that they both ended up, going into the Army at that point anyway. So we can circle back to that. But at that point where there was this segue and this sort of reinvigoration of town programs and grants and whatnot, where Divine sort of slid right in, there was a big announcement and a party at the Town Spa Pizza to celebrate this. And he explains that to the public, this is a press release from Divine, that the Explorers are a co-ed offshoot of the Boy Scouts that involves older teens and often focuses on a particular specialty such as law enforcement. The program existed before me, Divine, as an advisor, and attendance and enthusiasm was low. Divine polled members. This is his chief, Shastani, introducing it, and they're back and forth. Divine polled the members, asking them if they'd like to participate in a mock police academy. Advertised as for this academy idea, it got a really good response, Divine said. Originally, there were only 5 kids enrolled in the Explorer post, but through the advertising and accolades, the number grew to 14, then to 25 or 30. And the academy posts year-round, the meetings post year-round, but the academy runs from March to June, 2 nights a week. Divine knows something about breaking in cadets. He was a drill instructor in the military. I like giving them a taste of what they can expect, he said, although he admittedly scales it back for some students. Topics at the academy included things such as physical fitness and discipline, but the organization delves into criminal and constitutional law, self-defense, and forensics. We touch on a bunch of stuff, he said. Growing to more than 300 students that have come through it has grown to more than 300 students that have come through the program and have gone on to pursue careers in law enforcement. Divine said some kids simply find their home in the Explorers.
That is terrifying.
Yeah.
And that's the thing. If you're taking kids that are, you know, obviously they have to take in kids that aren't troubled, but if you're taking in kids that are troubled and need a mentor, you know, whether it be a boy or a girl, you know, the boys are looking up to him, thinking he's cool, that feeds his ego, and then the young girls are being groomed.
Yeah.
Said this young woman that I spoke to, who is in the Stoughton report, and we know of Sandra. And I always talk about it as it being an iceberg. Sandra's the tip of the iceberg.
Mm-hmm.
What's beneath the water? Because there could be a lot beneath the water. Excuse me. And that is my problem with the Stoughton report. Although it's a pretty good report, I wish it wasn't quite so redacted, but they stopped at Sandra. They did talk to a few people, but they stopped at Sandra. And I personally believe that every child that went through that program should be interviewed.
Well, who would dare come forward, because they know whether the presumption was that she died by suicide or died by some other means, which we now have come to understand. Why would they feel safe or secure, particularly when the person to whom to report your victimization would be somebody from Norfolk County DA's office? So if you go to look up what to do if you're a victim of this organization, you could either call the Stoughton Police Department, and we know a few people have been treated a certain kind of way along the way in calling the Stoughton Police Department, or your other line of defense is to call the DA's office that obviously failed terribly in investigating Sanders' case, and also let all 3 of these, 3 who are directly in question here, fade off into the sunset without any repercussions whatsoever, other than losing, they on some level lost their jobs, but they didn't suffer any discipline. So the cover up or the sweep of that, who would call that office if that's your line of defense?
I'm not saying them call the office. I'm saying they should have went to these children.
Oh yeah, without a doubt. But so part of both investigations, the Stoughton internal report and the state police investigation, both of them point towards a huge gray area in terms of how to make connections with the individuals who went through this program, because who was in charge of the records? Robert Devine. There's missing. They pointed out in both of the investigations that that records on the children who attended the program. You just heard me say that there were 300 who went through it, and I could actually probably circle back to the internal investigation and find the exact number that the investigator stated he was able to find regarding records on these children. It is a hell of a lot lower than 300. So I don't know if those records were destroyed, or if they're hidden somewhere, or if Devine is holding on to them as leverage via his lawyer. There's a lot of different things that could be going on there, but we do know that Chastain, who was in charge at that time, decided to sort of give over everything. When he was making the announcement to promote Devine after he, took this Explorer program into the stratosphere, if you will, when he announced Devine being a great candidate to come into power, he said that the addition of putting Devine as deputy chief would allow him, this is Chastain, to concentrate on administrative issues such as licensing and public records.
Yeah, so Devine
he sort of washed his hands of it. You know, he said, well, I'm going to start here with doing more administratively and with licensing and public records, but anything that Divine took over, that was the cutoff. It was sort of, you know, he wasn't going to mess with, as far as I'm concerned, he wasn't going to look into whatever Divine was doing, because he was trying to either slow his career down or just kind of, you know, go another way and not have to deal with the hands-on stuff. And hands-on is a terrible way to say it in this context. But Divine was everywhere. He was in every case. He was in every youth program. He was in every any press release, anything where you could be on the news smiling and making a sweeping announcement of an awesome thing that Stoughton was doing, including management of substance abuse programs. That's another subject entirely. Making these, you know, these very positive sweeping announcements of the good that they were doing. Divine was at the head of all that. He was the one. So he was, and I remember, you know, I live in this area, and I would have been privy to catching those, you know, those news releases. They're hard to get hands on now. There's only sort of a handful of them. You can still find them because, like I said, back then Divine was everywhere, and then he was sort of a little bit quiet for a while because he was under investigation for inappropriate behavior with another. And by the way, to bring back the pattern of this behavior, when the situation happened with the you know, the adult woman that the Divine was mixed up with in a scandal, he sort of said a lot of the same things that have been negatively, you know, talked about with Sandra, such as I just wanted to help this person out in recovery from, you know, she was down and out. She had gone through some troubles, and I was looking to rescue her. So he said the same thing about the, you know, the older woman that he was involved with, that he was trying to help her with some personal issues, and that translated into a romance, and a romance that got messy, and then a romance that got very toxic and criminal. But it turns out that she didn't do any of the criminal actions that he accused her of. He manifested them in order to get himself out of the situation. And I don't know that the general public knows a lot about that, because Chastain and the town of Stoughton were doing the best that they could to keep a lid on how ugly and how sordid the story really was, because it reflected so poorly on them, and the misuse of the state police again, because they had the state police on a wild goose chase to arrest this woman for harassment. That was a months long, almost as long as Sandra's investigation into the alleged harassment that never occurred. It didn't occur. It was made up, and it was made up by Divine and his wife, by the way.
Yes. Yeah, I did read the report on that. And I mean, it's the impression that one would get from it is that like you say, he was trying to create this narrative that he was trying to help her. I mean, I did also notice those repetitions, and I think that there are a lot of repetitive tactics when it comes to these three. Like, I was just thinking about that comment of saying, you know, I'll take you on a date when you're 18. It seems very similar to that initial rejection of Sandra's. You can't be in the program, try again. And that's like very concerning if you think about everything that we've just spoken about, and the fact that they have these, I'm going to say, advanced tactics, because they're obviously very good at what they're doing, and they're still just walking around right now. I mean, even as not necessarily as police officers, what is to prevent them from doing this in a different context? Especially if, like we said, I think before we hit record, we were saying there's a lot of parallels to this case and the Micah Miller case. It shows you that it can happen in a different context. All you really need is a person in a position of power. Yeah. And these people are still free. Like,
well, and a lot of psychological, I would call them full-blown psyops, you know, type of operators. So a lot of psychological conditioning tactics that are used, as would happen in any, I'll say the C word, cult-like atmosphere, which is definitely the case with the church. I don't want to just write off the entire field of law enforcement as being a cult, but there are certainly a lot of similar themes there. But keeping in mind, even though our friend from the other police department, who is not decertified, he was sort of written off as an isolated incident perpetrator, and since she was an adult, sort of, that was sort of written off. I would argue at this point that he was let off the hook, not because of the nature of the incident, but because he has probably been providing information, because he has made it, the parallel between his career trajectory and spending time with the Farwells and also building a relationship with Sandra through her love of animals, tells me that he was not removed from the repetitive and the mental conditioning of her. And also he was fully aware of the tracking that was being used,
That's what I was going to bring up. They were tracking
knowing where Sandra was going to be. That information was shared with the other officer, and as well as the fifth mysteriously unknown military recruiter. So there was a share of information, there was a tracking of her whereabouts, and there was a back end call type of situation in effect with Sandra. And I can't even imagine what they're uncovering as they're exploring how far the extent of it goes, because we're talking about 5 people that has now been narrowed down to 3, and over the course of many, many years. So I would argue that the 2 who are no longer on the, on the list of facing criminal charges, they must be doing something cooperatively in terms of sharing information, because how else could they just fade off into obscurity without facing any consequences? There had to have been deals made, because some of the information has sort of been faded off into obscurity, but if you keep looking, you can find a few layers, such as an accidental failure to cross out a name here and there. But the military recruitment part is of major interest to me, because I think that there is another implication of how maybe the Army or the Department of Defense or another agency entirely has intervened on behalf of their, terrible way to say, but property, meaning their military personnel, and that there's a layer of protection to keep them from their stories coming out into the public, because they were soldiers, and it doesn't mean that they don't face consequences through their commander, or the military branch that they were active in serving, but it does mean that there is a layer of secrecy there that I can't quite get a handle on. And by the way, Divine was a military. I mean, we're just learning about this now, about him being a military drill instructor. Never before had it been mentioned that he had a career in the military. I mean, it's been mentioned vaguely in his talks in law journals about his knowledge about weapons and about certain legislation. He said, well, I know what I'm talking about, both from the law enforcement world and the military world, but he's always been incredibly vague about it, until only recently it came to the light that he worked with the Coast Guard. Good luck even finding his name in a Coast Guard database. And I'm curious about that. I mean, we know because William and Matthew Farwell had a lot of very high publicized articles and photo ops of them doing this riveting work in the Army as explosive bomb techs, and they brought that even into the high school and did demonstrations so that they could bring their heroism to the kids and sort of show off with it. So we know about that, but you don't necessarily see Divine, doing that. He just sort of moved quietly and almost undetected from one type of drill instruction to being a police academy instructor to being a youth explorer instructor seamlessly. And nobody was really looking backward into how he had the skill set. He was just sort of convincing everybody that he knows what he's doing. And that's how he's been able to operate for, I don't know, maybe 25 years.
So, I mean, he's gotten through a lot as basically a salesperson. I mean,
yeah,
and rising to leadership by, keeping people down and making them, do push-ups and cry because they don't like the physical activity. I mean, he's been able to use a lot of strategies to keep people from noticing the bad deeds that he's been doing behind the scenes. Because it's very hard to argue with somebody messing up or doing something awful if you're so exhausted that you can't even speak. And I think that's where the boys come in. You know, Mizzy was talking about how there was different treatment for the boys versus the girls. Well, what better way to subdue them all by making them run a million laps and, you know, lift truck fenders so that they can't even function at the end of the day.
And they twisted themselves through it as well,
Mhm.
right?
Because you don't want to look like you know, like you don't want to look like you're weak. Girls don't necessarily have as much of a problem about breaking down in tears and saying that they don't want to, you know, do another push up. And I don't mean to gender, you know, specify, but I would bet that Divine probably had a different level of PT for boys versus girls because it, you know, we know that they used that in, you know, presidential fitness when we were kids. There was different levels. You know, the girls only had to do 5 push-ups, the boys had to do 50 because those were sanctioned things. But I don't know. He could have very easily gotten away with overtaxing the boys and wearing them out and making them do this arduous physical activity, but sitting down with the girls and, you know, coddling them in a different way. That would be tough to figure out because he buried all the records, or he kept them in a box locked in his office and then got rid of them. You know,
But it wouldn't be surprising.
Yeah, I'm only finding out because people keep coming to me and telling me about it.
Yeah, and it's tough to put it into perspective, you know, without the records.
I want to talk about William for a second, because we talk about Matthew a lot because of, you know, he was the last person to see Sandra alive, and he's the suspect if in fact it was a murder, which Dr. Bodden believes she was murdered and strangled. But William is almost like an enigma because he's, you know, he's been accused of having, you know, sex with her in cars on duty and talking to her on duty, those things. But he was doing weird things that almost looked like he was trafficking her. He was introducing her to other people. He introduced her, I believe he's the one who introduced her to Heel. He introduced her to the military recruiter. Mm-hmm. He was trying to introduce her to other men. He was telling her to take photos and videos of sex with other men. He was looking himself up in the database over and over again. He did it 24 times. And I think he was looking up to see if there was anything coming. Did Sandra get in trouble? Was he under investigation? He was also looking Sandra up in the system, which you're not supposed to look up. You're not supposed to use that system unless there's something, you know, criminal going on or something having to do with an investigation. So like his part in this story is kind of locked away, like Suzanne has talked about, partially might be because of the military. But I think he goes kind of unnoticed because we have, you know, Robert Devine is kind of the big bad, but also Matthew Farwell is the bad, you know, like, you know, Robert Devine is the ringleader, but Matthew Farwell did all this. He was the main person in Sandra's life continuously. But William, I don't think gets enough notice and enough scrutiny on him because he was up to stuff that is like different. And I personally believe he was trafficking Sandra, even just by description, you know, by saying, take photos and videos of you having sex with men, you know, introducing her to other men. That's trafficking. Whether or not.
And also Mizzy, outing the affair to Matthew's wife.
Yeah.
William's the one who did that. I'm sure to cause, you know, cause diversion, cause upset, cause drama, to take away from whatever creepy things. Like you said, the list is long and illustrious what he did. But so that's a good point. Yeah.
I think he needs more eyes on him to what he was up to. Because they've said in some of this came out during their post commission interviews and investigation, because for them to fully be decertified, this stuff is coming out. So there's that investigation that they're going through. There's the civil case that's going on, but there's also the Attorney General is also investigating them, and so is the FBI. I believe the FBI is more looking at Morrissey's office, but it also goes out to them because it's in the commission of a crime, the cover-up. You know, they're part of the cover-up of Sandra's case. So it's a conspiracy cover-up. And people don't understand how much her case really is being investigated, or how much she is part of.
Well, so William, as far as I know, Mizzy, and you can correct me because you probably have it memorized just like I do, but in the IAD investigation, the moment where FBI is sort of invoked or incurred is as a result of William Farwell's, using of these databases and resources, because that misuse of it is a red flag in and of itself. So that's where the tech side of FBI, I'm sure I have the woman's name written down, but it doesn't matter because you can't ask them what they're doing mid-investigation. So I just happen to remember her name and her specialty. So they would be looking into, the computer end of it and trying to ascertain what was going on there. But also his invoking of Williams' invocation of certain military protections in order to secure another job right before he resigned, that's going to be a big issue with, I don't know, would it be the Department of Defense? I'm not exactly sure who that authority is, but that's where his case gets sort of taken out of our, meaning, Massachusetts or even federal jurisdiction, and handed to, I don't know, the White House. I mean, it goes way up, because he basically would have been using a couple of different military, legislative acts in order to secure his wife and his family to move out of state. And he did that the day before he was supposed to answer to the internal investigation. It's called the USERA Act. That's part of the USSERA, the USERA Act. He invoked that and the SPEED Act, which is another piece of legislation in Massachusetts and federal, that if somebody's experiencing any kind of adversity where they are and in their current job, they can call their commander and say, he was still active with the Army, so I need you to get me a new job. He could have done what Devine did and said, I'm in kind of a domestic mess or dispute with an unhinged female. I want to get my wife and kids out of here. I'm on leave from my actual job, right now. Now's a good time for us to up and move. And P.S., you guys owe me that, because I have stellar acts of bravery under my belt under the U.S. military. So that's the kind of agreement, the U.S. military owns him, therefore he's able to say, I need a favor. And that favor got him to Maryland and working for TSA. They found out by, press release later, or somebody notifying them that he had a bad internal investigation, and they fired him because he was dishonest with them. But he had already moved on to something else in New Mexico. So he's been able to move around and get away from and out from under any criminal charges, obviously. If they find out, I would think, if they find out that he's guilty or suspected of criminal behavior, then they're going to come down on him harder than any one of our agencies. But we'll never know about it, so we'll never know the whole story, because that's what happens when the U.S. military is the one who you answer to. It might as well be God himself, that just disappears and goes away. And
that's why the court commission and the civil case are so important, because we can see into those. Once it fully gets going, I know they're starting to take depositions soon. It'll be public. Like, people can actually go to the trial. People can watch it online. It won't be fully available because it does have abuse of a minor, but people can actually go and watch the trial. And also with the post commission, they're gathering a lot of information on what happened. And I hope with these two entities, we are going to find out a lot. I mean, there was just a hearing the other day and we found out a lot.
Mm-hmm.
So there's with these two entities, since they're more public than say the FBI investigation and the AG's investigation, we can see more into it. And I'm hoping, because they have to sit for depositions in the civil case, I'm hoping a lot comes out, because you never know, they might turn at each other.
I think that's actually already going on with William.
I do too, because I have a little insight into it that I'm not allowed to put out there. But hopefully, with their interviews and interviews of witnesses, more things are going to come out. And then once the trial happens, we can see the case more. We'll be able to see, crime scene photos and all those things, unfortunately, probably photos of Sandra when she was found. Those type of things, the public will be able to see that if they go to the trial. So I'm hoping with the civil, that's why when people say to me, oh, it's a civil case, it's not important. Yes, it's very important. And people say, oh, why did, the family, all they did was do a civil case. Well, when the police are denying you justice, and when the attorney general is denying you justice, that's the only course you have as a family. I mean, they could be a little more out there saying stuff, but this is the path they chose. And doing the civil case, get some answers. They will have, they are subpoenaing, I can't even talk tonight. They are getting witnesses in there. They are going to be, they have to take the deposition. Yes, they can invoke the fifth, but they have to sit for a deposition.
Yeah, and I guess that all we can really do is focus on awareness, because, with the limited knowledge, what can we do? I mean, I think that the Facebook group and stuff like that, I know you guys have been working tirelessly to try and evoke this awareness, especially with like social media and now just media in general, like speaking like this and stuff. And I mean, I do hope that this story gets even more out there, because I can see how well the Facebook group is doing now. Yeah, I mean, it has. I think we weren't recording yet when I asked you, but it has been growing, right?
Before it dropped about Dr. Bodden, we were at like 6,000 maybe, and we've doubled. We've doubled since that came out. And we have a lot of people engaging, and it's hard now because it's more I feel like I'm policing the page than actually being able to get content out there, because I have so much content that I need to go back and pull back up so I can reshare it instead of remaking it, because I shared so much, like little, I clip
along the way. Yeah,
I'd clip out little things that I thought people should read of the Stoughton report or the MSP report. And now it's like I'm basically just policing instead of content. The only content I'm putting out there is petition, standouts, those type of things. So and pulling like other creators videos to put on the page. But I got to go back, really sit there and go back through, and so I can repost everything that I had already done for like the last year. So it's easy to share, but it's like so far back that it's hard for me to get to.
Well, that and everybody's attention spans are kind of they're such that they want a quick hit. They want to give me a synopsis, give me a finer points of it. And I answer to those individually until 3 a.m. and drive myself crazy. But there is it can't necessarily be a bullet point of boop, 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 because there are a lot of layers, and this is so highly sensitive because of the fact that, I mean, I get it. We can't, on the one hand, there's no re-victimizing Sandra because she's not with us. But on the other hand, there is the smearing that goes along with it, or there's the, dishonoring her memory. And that's a huge issue, and or hurting the family further. I mean, there are, surviving family members where there's got to be sensitivity to that. But also there are still living and afraid to come forward victims, without a doubt. So it can't really be a boom, 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 because it's still in progress and there's no closed chapter. It's not, again, it's sort of on the wish list of getting to a point where it becomes a benchmark case in terms of making this type of pattern behavior no longer possible or tolerated by organizations. I mean, it shouldn't be tolerated, but it's obviously been still possible. And trying to make the language of it or the awareness of it to be comfortable enough that people can handle the discussions. Because, as I say with other difficult topics such as suicide, the language and the terminology that have to be explored are painful and trigger inducing, and should be handled with care. It's not for the faint of heart. And we've got a lot of people who will log on to the page, as Mizzy can attest, who will say, I want to know more about the story, but to be honest, I have trouble looking at it or reading it or looking at or seeing the videos because they're upsetting. And I always just urge them to take breaks and to take very, very cautious sort of self-care if you're if you're consuming any type of content like this, because it is difficult, but it also needs to come out, because at the end of the day, we don't want another Sandra. I mean, we want justice for Sandra, but we sure as hell don't want to see another Sandra.
And that's my goal. Go ahead. I'm sorry, Rosie.
No, go ahead.
That's why I make sure too. Sandra wasn't a perfect person, because none of us are, and we do talk about her. Some of the stuff that was going on with her, like the mental illness, but she was a full-fledged person, and she was excited about the baby she was having. So when people try to come after her, that oh, she was just sleeping with a bunch of cops, she was a badge bunny. No, she wasn't. She was somebody who was abused, and we have to explain it. That's why I'm out there trying to get her story out there. But I'm very honest too, that she was abused, but she also did have mental illness, and they're trying to twist the mental illness into it's her fault when it's not her fault. They compounded on what happened to her. They made it worse, the mental illness. And I always say, you can't strike the match and light a fire, then come run and be the hero and put the flames out, because that's what these men did.
Mm-hmm.
And we need to treat them like the villains they are. Whether like I said before, I believe Sandra was murdered, and now we have a doctor saying it was homicide, a world-renowned doctor saying it was homicide. But whether it was murder or Sandra at Sandra's hands, it was because of these men and what they did to her. And that is the focus that we need to take on the story. That is, it's about Sandra, but it's more about these men, and it's about getting justice for Sandra, but it's also getting the word out about the abuse that it incurred, that Sandra endured. They are the reason that she is gone today.
Yeah.
They are the reason why Sandra is not here with her baby.
It is also very possible that there is some type of correspondence that is deep in the what do you want to call it, the sealed information locker that has threatening language in it, because they're the unfortunate that it's blessing and a curse type of thing. The fact that there was all of this surreptitious and disgusting behind the scenes communication, but on the other hand, these guys couldn't seem to stop any of the communication or the behavior, because there is a terabyte of it. What is that? I think it was 30,000 or 50,000 pages of correspondences. So, so if Matthew Devine, yeah, I'm merging them together. If Matthew Farwell were to engage in a conversation about the day that their physical relationship began, what's to say that he didn't shoot off his mouth or his text fingers about other really, really damning, topics? Because obviously we're talking about, they obviously want to talk about her being, unstable or having mental health issues. Clearly these guys are not right in the head either, if they were continuing all of this behavior and looking as, suspicious as Matthew Farwell did going in and out of there. They had, just thousands of interactions that we know were on the clock, while they were working as police officers. And that's just the communications. So it would be hard to imagine that nothing was ever said with another party around, or in some kind of communication forum where he, or even more than one of them, said something that might have been scary, or might have, pointed towards causing her harm.
Go along with that. Along with how twisted the relationship was, Matthew brought her into his home to babysit his children.
Yeah,
that's twisted. You're bringing this girl that you groomed since 13 and started having, inappropriate sex with her. You sexually assaulted her at 15, and you're bringing her to your home to babysit your children. So if Sandra was as crazy as they're trying to make her out to be, why was he bringing her around his children?
I mean, that was what flagged the similarities for me with the Mike Miller case, because she was also brought in as a babysitter, while her future husband was married to somebody else. It was the same thing in a lot of ways, and the way that she's being spoken about after her death as well, and being described as crazy. It's I'm sure that it's a bigger problem.
I've listened to that guy talk a few times, and I swear I want to do things to my phone and computer when I hear him talk, because it is so despicable the way he portrays her as being, even in her, how can he still continue to go on and talk about her
Right.
being unhinged, or being, failing to take her meds, or that his whole life was devoted towards taking care of her. The fact that people, yes, the fact that people are still giving him the forum to pontificate on how much of a victim he is. I mean, it sounds, if you played any type of conversation from Robert Devine when he was being investigated by IAA the first time around with an affair and a scandal in the department, he sounds exactly like, I don't even know the guy's name. I think I've erased it from the super church, because the terminology and the victim language that they use, and that they convince everybody outwardly of it being true, is so gaslighting. And so as long as they keep talking and keep whining and crying and being and playing that role, people are going to get confused and diverted and say, oh, well, maybe he was a victim of circumstance. Maybe he is just a put upon guy who was trying to raise his kids, run a mega church, or in Devine's case, propel a police department into the new age of law enforcement. As long as they can keep that exterior, they can continue to do really bad things.
Well, it's also these are men in power who they're saying, you're not allowed to question me. I am the powerful person here. I'm the one, and I'm the one that heads this entity, whether it be the church or the police department, and don't question what I'm doing, because I am too powerful for you to question. And I've seen videos of him too, and it's like the narcissism that falls off his body is like, and that's how Devine is.
So this is how I see Devine sort of molding and shaping Matthew and William. I mean, I don't know if in this lifetime, I don't know if I'll ever be able to piece it together, but in getting them to get into the Explorer program and giving them, the positive reinforcement, William becoming lieutenant, him being in charge of all the cadets. So as a 14 or 15-year-old, being able to get younger boys to drop to the ground and do this arduous, physical activity, or get girls to scream and cry because they're afraid of some type of discipline. I mean, there's a lot going on there that's problematic, but also Devine was giving them a little bit more running room that they abuse, such as illegal activity, like doing false stops for impersonating police officers. And he's the one who taught them to do that, and made sort of cheeky little, almost like play acting, videos celebrating these, almost like putting on a play of these apprehensions that they were doing as part of the program. So imagine you've got a 14, 15-year-old boys that are maybe somewhat mentally disturbed, that maybe have some kind of trouble at home, and you've got this guy that you think is a hero that you look up to, who's going to make your career, who's going to mold you and shape you into being like him. And he's letting you use fake GUNS to carry out fake arrests and roll around in, I think they were using like shop cars from how all high schools have a car that you work on that's like property of the school, using cars to pretend to do arrests, and, tackling suspects to the ground. This was all really happening with these 6'5" guys who were still kids and on a power trip. And when anything went wrong, Devine was just covering it up. So say somebody went, crying into the principal's office to say, I can't do this Explorer program anymore. These guys tackle me to the ground. They busted my lip and my ribs hurt and they're crazy. And Devine comes in and says, no, they just don't listen to them. He's a discipline problem. See here, he's been in trouble 3 times. He's lying. Matthew Farwell didn't do anything. William Farwell didn't hurt him. They didn't throw him in the back of the car and take him, to a remote location and do bad things to him. He covered all of that up and gave them a taste of what it would be like. I mean, he says it in his own publicity release, is that he knows how to shape these young minds and get them to, submit. He says it in his own words, and everybody's like, wow, this is great. You're going to get my kid in line. Because
they'll thank him, right?
So he was making it into like a sort of a Scared Straight type of program. I don't know. I mean, those are kind of worldwide, right? The ones that you see on Netflix where they bring youth into a prison and have people scream at them until they they don't skip school anymore. I mean, Divine was trying to do that, but he was using unstable, you know, he was handpicking because he was vetting their profiles and saying, yeah, this one with the absolutely undiagnosed mental health issue, I'm going to put him in charge of running the program.
Right, and that's damaging to him as well. I mean, the perpetrator at some point was a victim. It's just weird to think about, and obviously it's hard to show them any kind of compassion after what they've done. But if you think all the way back to then, that they just weren't okay for that kind of power either. It was
no, they were kids. And they were kids who obviously had some types of defect. I don't feel bad saying that, because look at them now. They're absolutely criminals at the very least. So it's not irrational to say that they obviously had some kind of defect. I would think that the defect was already demonstrable by the fact that they were chasing after Divine to follow in his footsteps and to become him. That's already disturbing to think about on its own. But the fact that he made them more powerful and sort of he groomed them to be predators. And when Mizzy talks about talking to people who say that they were punks or that they were bullies, they were allowed to do it completely unchecked because they had the man in charge who was basically king of the town for a while, giving them license to do it and cover. And if he had to go into Chastain to explain why there was a big, to do at the Explorer playground today, or why somebody was coming in to complain that they got hurt, Divine is the one who was answering to that. He's the one who was going into his chief and saying, no, that was just kids being kids. That was boys being boys. We've heard this terminology a million times. Boys will be boys. They need to suck it up. I'm going to have to discipline them more. So imagine that. Imagine him in charge of saying, I'm going to have to discipline. Actually, I'm going to have to show more discipline with the girl who complained that they did something wrong to her, because she is obviously lying. So he was able to do all of that with the files of what was going wrong in these kids' lives in his office, and nobody asking him any questions. It's truly horrifying to think that he had that much, and that nobody was really questioning. I mean, there are dozens and dozens of people who have been involved in looking into this guy before and now. And I don't know if they're intimidated by, or just realize the consequences of being wrong if they don't have him, if they don't have the proper evidence, because he's very, very smart and he has a law degree. So I'm sure he's been around every corner saying, no, you can't. And here's Massachusetts general law that says you can't. And here's what will happen to you. And he's threatening everybody who will listen to sue for defamation of character. And that's been his MO since the incident of 2014, and so on and so forth, is that he'll sue everybody for defamation. And he's doing that now with the Post Commission, which is, I don't know if Mizzy, when that next hearing is, but
I don't know the exact date, but I can get it. But
I know I have it too. But yeah, I mean, basically anybody who's been trying to discipline him or hold him accountable, he threatens with suing, because he can't arrest anybody anymore because he's not a cop anymore.
But I look at it, the stuff that I personally am saying, most of it comes from his own police department. His own police department said Sandra Birchmore was groomed. His own police department says things were going on with Sandra while on duty. His own police department says, there was another child. His own police department says that the Tiffany incident.
Everything we're saying is fair game.
And everything is, it's opinion and speculation as well. I mean,
yeah. But a lot of it is coming from what his own police department is saying these things. So for people to repeat them and dive a little bit deeper into them, how can he can't, how he could try to sue people, but it's his own police department saying it,
Nothing's based.
We'll see exactly how far his lawyer is able to take anything like that, because unfortunately for Robert Divine, I don't think that he's able to handle anything legally anymore. And by the way, when you go to look up anything regarding his law his certification or his licensure, which should be fair game to anybody who's maybe just shopping for a lawyer, I would think, to be able to look those things up. And I have. If you go to search any of that, there's a it shows that it's been redacted. It shows that it's been hidden or deleted. So for example, if you go to his actual law firm, I think it's in Southeastern, there's other lawyers working there, but his name is not on the staff list anymore. And I've thought about asking one if he still works there, but I know that it's being every interaction relative to him is being watched. I mean, these guys are rightfully so incredibly paranoid, as we know from, William Farwell obsessively searching all of those databases. They're aware of their shady behavior enough to be worried about, what's happening to them. And how far, given that there's not much left to lose except actually freedom, it's a little bit harrowing to think what extent they would go to quiet people, or to not have them looked into.
Yeah,
I mean,
we
you know how much, yeah.
Yeah.
And that's now. I mean, obviously, it's without question that there were, even before Sandra died, there were, all three of them were meeting with her, speaking with her, sort of cracking down on her to shut up, to stop talking about the baby, to stop talking about her affairs with them. Even Devine himself got together with her in December of 2020 that we know of. So, and that was his MO previously in prior situations. And even with the girl who talked about the grooming incident, Mizzy, is that pulling aside privately and saying, you can't do this anymore. You've got to shape up, or basically disciplining for their outrageous behavior because of the fact that they were groomed and gaslit and abused, is that he would make them feel bad or make them feel scared. He definitely communicated to Sandra in the weeks before she died, and as did William. So we've seen that far-fetched.
Sandra had the ability to take away everything from them. She had the ability, not just Matthew with the baby, but everything. She knew too much. So
there was definitely a conversation that Devine himself alluded to, in terms of basically pulling her aside and telling her to cool it and to be quiet and to stop this nonsense type of thing. I mean, I don't remember which report it was in, but Devine's kind of pattern is to let out like a little tiny bit of truth, like maybe a 10% of truth. Well, yeah, I talked to her. I told her to, shape up and quit, act in a certain kind of way, and told her, we keep these things quiet and private and work them out. This is a private matter. He's done that in multiple times when he's been looked at in a negative manner. That's what he says outwardly. Do you think one-on-one, it's quite possible that those conversations might extend into threats? I would imagine so. I mean,
Matthew had 2 altercations with Sandra before she died, and one of them, Sandra told her friend that he said, "I wish you would kill yourself," or "I wish you would die." So it was, everything was starting to escalate, and Sandra was starting to escalate because she was like, "No, this is our baby, not just my baby," and she wanted money from him. She wanted him to sign the birth certificate. So all that was causing problems for all three of them. Yeah. That might be why Matthew told. I mean, that might be why William told.
Yeah, well, he did. He did. I think that there might have been a little bit of, I mean, who knows? We'll find out as things unfold. But it seems to me that there was tension between William and Matthew, because they were both sort of boxed in. And by the way, both of them intimate with her around the same time.
Yeah.
So there's that part of it too. I don't recall William outwardly refusing DNA and polygraph, but Matthew did. I don't know. I don't know
he was even asked.
No, well, he wasn't asked, but we don't know about the military component, if he's faced consequence, because who knows, maybe there could be that dynamic where the military could have compelled him and said, "No, listen, you signed your ass away to the U.S. military. Your DNA is our DNA. You will comply with this." I wouldn't even know where to begin to scratch the surface about how that criminal process works, if it involves the U.S. military. So that's a whole other layer that I don't even know we could get into. But as far as them, speaking with her one-on-one to try and, they keep repeating the mantra of getting her head straight and getting her to stop acting crazy, as though it's all her fault, and her natural progression of being a gaslit and abused individual and escalating her behavior and running her mouth to everyone or threatening to speak to wives. That's very much in keeping with somebody who's struggling as somebody who's been the victim of abuse, and nobody's really listening. And she definitely was isolating from certain friends. I don't know if there's any pattern about which friends might have been saying, hey, you really need to end that business with a cop guy and actually, get your life together. I don't know if there's a pattern associated with who she became estranged from in that way. Maybe Mizzy knows more about that from talking to them, but I would imagine that a lot of the estrangement, I spoke to one who doesn't really want to be talked to further, who said that that there was a pattern of cutting people off and getting in fights with and blocking and deleting and not talking to certain individuals because they were confronting her about this unhealthy pattern.
Well, like when it comes to her family,
and her family does speak of it. And
when it comes to the family, they didn't agree with what she was doing. So a lot of family weren't talking to her at the time of her death because of that. They didn't agree because they didn't know what was really going on. They only knew the surface thing that, she was supposedly dating a married cop. And a lot of family didn't agree with that. When things came out, it was more like, oh, she was just sleeping around with all these men. Not a lot of people. Part of the problem of that is a lot of people don't understand what grooming is.
Right.
And so a lot, there is a lot of family who wasn't speaking to her because of what they thought her actions were. And
that's how abusers thrive is in total isolation. I mean, they're moving as far as I'm concerned, they're moving to the apartment and away from everybody, and was the so for lack of a better way to put it, the nail in the coffin for her there was a period where she, and COVID for that matter, because there was a period where she was still sort of interfacing with people either through the job or through classes at Massasoit, but was slowly and steadily becoming more estranged because of those who were saying, like, I hope you're done with all that business with, so and so, and are, taking care of you, pursuing your interests, moving on with your life. And I mean, I can speak from experience. That's when you omit things to people because you're in a dark space and you're trying to stay in control of it. So you don't let them in on it, and you just and COVID definitely allowed for the extensive reach of perpetrated, of predatory behavior in darkness and in isolation from one another. Because people were very distracted and they weren't getting together in such a way that they could look at a friend and say, hey, you don't seem like yourself. And also your behavior indicates to me that, that there's something going on that we should talk more about. If you're not even having that face-to-face contact, who's going to call you out on it? The school, those were all new people where she was working in her job. They were, some of them were relatively new to her.
And when Sandra got pregnant, she was reaching out to a lot of people because she was excited about having this baby. And on Valentine's Day, she was supposed to make the big announcement about her having a baby. I have a photo picture of a friend of hers. She painted a little, she painted something that says, the announcement of my own little Valentine. And she was going to make this big announcement on Valentine's Day. And so, but anyone she saw, any friends that she bumped into, any family that she bumped into, she would tell them about this baby. She was calling people that she hadn't talked to in years, telling them she was pregnant, but she was going to make this grand announcement on Valentine's Day. So she was trying to reach out to people at this moment in her life. Even though she was estranged from some people, she was trying to reach out to everyone because she wanted everybody to know how happy and excited she was about her being pregnant.
By the way, that is kind of textbook PTSD behavior, is sort of reinventing yourself with a new, a new chapter beginning. And again, speaking from experience on that, you do tend to be like, okay, never mind all that, what's been going on in the last few years that has made us, you know, estranged from each other. Here's what's going on now. And I really would appreciate y'all getting behind me on this, because this is to be celebrated. This is my new, you know, identity, if you will, which unfortunately didn't get a chance to come to fruition, because that there can be a recovery and healing in that if life is allowed to continue. And in this case, devastatingly, it did not.
Yeah.
And that is, it's just devastating to think that anybody could be on the cusp of, well, here's where it's all going to change. Here's where the tide changes and life begins. Somebody else got in the way of that.
Yeah.
Whether
I
actually
think it was a new beginning. She thought it was a new beginning for her, and she was so excited. And I mean, that's one of the things that her aunt said to the police. She said that makes no sense, because I spoke to her earlier that day and she was happy. And she was, like I said, I've talked to friends that bumped into her within weeks of what happened, and they said she was so happy. They'd never seen her that happy. She was excited. You know, she had been pregnant before and had miscarriages, and she was just so excited to reveal, because she was 10 weeks pregnant. So she only had 2 weeks to go till get to Valentine's Day. And she was so excited to make this announcement so the world would know. But she would tell anybody that she bumped into, I'm pregnant. She was so excited. I mean, I cannot convey how happy and excited she was to have this child. That's one of the reasons why I don't believe that she did it. And that's one of the reasons why I started speaking out, because I had people saying, or I read people saying, and I saw interviews on TV, you know, that people were saying something's funky here. And from the second I saw her story, I knew something was off. And like I said, I keep talking to friends and family. People keep coming forward to me, and they keep saying she was happy and she was excited.
Thank you so much for joining me today. It was a really great conversation. I really enjoyed having both of you on here. And we're going to have to do this again, because I feel like you guys say, it's an iceberg. We didn't even really get to touch the surface of Sandra's case. And I think that it really is important to start at the beginning. So start with, you know, the phenomena of grooming, which is why I didn't really want to talk too much about her passing and the findings about it most likely being a homicide just yet. So I would love to have you guys back. But thank you so much for an amazing conversation. I mean, this is the second time we've spoken, so people don't know that, but it is always amazing speaking to both of you. And thank you so much for your insight and your continued effort on this case.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rosie. I appreciate it.
Thank you for having us.
You're welcome.